Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The comments and views expressed on The Moore Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The Moore Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from Amsterdam and across the world online. You're now watching The Moore Show and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm about to be joined with my guest, Paul Stonehill. Now, Paul was born in Kiev in the former USSR in 1959 and emigrated to the United States in 1972. Now, in his youth, Paul helped smuggle people from behind the Iron Curtain, aided dissidents, and smuggled banned literature into the former USSR. Now, he graduated from California State University with a BA in political science and wrote a thesis on the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Now, Paul has worked as a journalist covering warfare as well as freelancing on stories about UFO and anomalous phenomena. He joins me today to discuss his latest book, Russia's USO Secrets, Unidentified Submersible Objects in Russia and International Waters. Paul Stonehill, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on this morning. You're in California. I'm in Amsterdam. You've come on an hour early, so it's quite early your time right now. So I appreciate that, Paul. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Now this is interesting. This is UFOs and Russia. Your book, which is going to be coming on screen as well, is Russia's USO Secrets: Unidentified Submersible Objects in Russia and International Waters. Now, this book was co-authored with ufologist Philip Mantle in the UK. That's right. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how did you meet Philip Mantle?
We've met over 20 years ago through correspondence and research of several cases. And Philip was well known in Russia and had good contact with a number of Russian UFO researchers. And he also received very interesting information during the time of the best openness in the former Soviet Union and modern Russia. I would say from about 1991 to 1994. So Philip was well known even in 1989 during a famous Voronezh case. And I remember seeing his images, in the available media at the time.
Right. Now, thank you for that. Yeah. Now, Philip we couldn't get Philip on today due to technical reasons on my end with moving. I would have got Philip on otherwise, but just with my move, I couldn't do. So we might get Philip on separately. So I just want to pay a bit of homage to Philip Mantle as well. Okay. Now, with your background as well. Okay. So you got into ufology at the age of 8 years old. You were born in Kiev and ended up in the USA. Just my history is not fantastic. Was Kiev at some point part of the USSR before Ukraine became independent, or?
Yes, Kiev is the capital of Ukraine, and yes, it was subjugated and it was part of the Soviet Union at the time when I was born and left.
Okay.
Yes, and I've collected information about let's say paranormal phenomena, Soviet and Russian paranormal phenomena since early age. You're correct.
Wow. And have you been back? You must have been back to Kiev nowadays, or have you not?
I've not been back lately in Kiev and so forth, but I do keep in touch with the continuous daily with the Russian, Ukrainian, and other researchers. We exchange information on cases. We research some of the old cases that are quite prominent, and exchange information on what's going on today.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so you do have contacts back there, and okay, that's interesting. Do you have any family back there?
Maybe far away relatives, but that's about it.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I've been to Kiev and I've been to Odessa. I know Ukraine a tiny little bit, and yes, it's a fantastic place. But at the time when you were living there, it was I can imagine very, very different. Okay. So so you got a chance to get to the US, which is amazing, and you took that opportunity to go. Have you? Why have you sort of? Why is your main interest then in sort of ufology in Russia? I mean, that's a stupid question in one sense because that's where you come from. But I just wanted to get it from your take as well. What because obviously where you are, there's lots of UFO activity in America and lots of different cases. But why Russia in particular?
Well, because Kevin, if the world does not recognize what's going on in the largest country of the world and the incredible history of UFO observations that go back to ancient times, the picture would be incomplete. And that the same goes for China. I've done a lot of research about Chinese ufology. I have great contacts. I've lectured in Hong Kong, and I have to tell you that unless people in the West pay more attention to the developments in Russia and China, as well as other Asian nations, for example, you will not get anywhere a complete history of UFO phenomenon.
No, that is true, and getting information out of Russia, I can imagine, is quite difficult because there's no what would you call it? Freedom of Information Act as such. There's no. I mean, how does someone write to an agency in Russia to get files released on a UFO phenomena?
Well, they do not, and modern researchers, young scientists such as Vadim Chernobrov, Mikhail Gerstein, and others that I'm in touch with, they have their own ways. Some of them just, open field work to get information. They were able to collect a lot of the information from the project we will discuss, the Soviet official UFO research program, as much as possible. But no, you cannot write to the government and request information. Even back in late 1990s and early 1990s, when Pavel Popovich, the Soviet cosmonaut, famous Soviet cosmonaut who was very much interested in the UFO phenomenon, he was trying to obtain information, for example, helping ufologists, even about Roswell, files that Stalin had, and he received a response from the Russian archives and all the ministries, like security ministry and so forth. No, we do not have this information. They didn't say whether they had this information, but and today there is more secrecy in Russia than before. Let's say even I would say 20 years ago, for different reasons. But definitely, it's very hard to get interesting information out.
Yeah. And do you think the UFO phenomena in Russia or over Russian sites of interest is still as big nowadays as it ever was?
It is easily more citable, let's say. You can see more because of the new technology, and there are very interesting observations. And as usual, I would say that about 90%, it's definite, of another origin. Sometimes military, for the most part. Sometimes, something that is of natural origin. But still, people see a lot of the UFOs. Now, what's interesting is that we don't get the picture of as many visitations to the military sites as during the Soviet times, because this was, the height of the Cold War, for example, and whoever observed Soviet military was definitely more interested than today. At the same time, again, there is more secrecy in Russia, more military projects, more developments of powerful and small submarines and so forth. So I'm sure they guard their secrets just like any other military in the world.
That's so interesting that when you talk back about a time when there was such heightened tensions, and okay, tensions are quite high right now in some respects, but nowhere near what they were before, absolutely. You could say, well, you have said before that the UFOs are sort of attracted because of ecological damage as well that could be caused by such missiles being activated.
Absolutely. Now, ecology was one of the main aspects of UFO observations in the Soviet Union. Let me lay ground. Let me give a background. You see, in the Soviet Union, the government and their military high command were so much alarmed about UFOs that they had to institute a special program, academic/military research program they called it anomalous aerial phenomena. Well, they couldn't say UFOs, but that's what it was. And the program existed from 1977 till 1991. Officially, then 5 years more under the new Russian government, and I'm sure they have something else today. And but that was the official program, and every Soviet military soldier or seaman or airman had to provide information about sightings that they have had. And this was very interesting because all this information from the huge Soviet armed forces would flow into two specialized military institutes, centers to study such information, one in Leningrad and one near Moscow. And this was a tremendous effort, unparalleled anywhere else in the world. China may be coming close, but they have a different situation. And just imagine all the reports. We have a lot of them in the book, but I got to tell you that most of the information is still unavailable to readers, to researchers. But even from the facts that we found, I mean, it's incredible. And we present testimonies of military officers, of former KGB people. Very interesting case. For example, we go into different territories or land masses. For example, the Arctic territories of the Soviet Union and Russia. Incredible history of UFO observations, and some of them, for example, were even done by the KGB, which was not at all their responsibility, and they shirked it. They never liked to get involved. Nevertheless, here it was. Or maybe the same area, I would say about 20 years after the KGB research, there was a report from one of the top Russian scientists today, Vladimir Lukin, who is in charge of the Antarctic and the Arctic scientific expeditions. Well, he himself observed something in the 1980s and revealed this information back in 1997. And we have a number of scientists who came forth and reported, or who had to report to different Soviet agencies about the unusual objects they had sighted under the sea, next to their scientific ships. You have the same with the military. They encountered unusual objects. I would say definitely we have cases going back to 1940s and 1950s. And you start seeing patterns when you read the book. For example, the time from 1979 through 1983, especially 1979 and 1982, there was an upsurge of UFO/USO sightings in the former Soviet Union, and especially around military bases. We have a chapter dedicated to the very unusual phenomenon that nobody knew about in the West until we brought it out. Ghosts of the ocean, the Soviet Navy Kvakery research. It's the name they gave to very unusual entities that would interfere with their secret submarine missions in different oceans. And, these were not the Americans, because the Soviets had a chance to speak to their NATO counterparts during the glasnost, perestroika, Gorbachev's policies period, and they found out that the Americans thought it was the Russians, the Soviets, who would interfere with their missions. So you have this phenomenon, and this is very interesting because I want to bring it to your readers' attentions. No matter how much you hear about the tensions today in the world, what's interesting is that you see joint naval exercises. Russia, China, United States, China. It's like our naval forces are trying to show to somebody that if there is a reason to, we can come together. And I don't want to say repel any danger, but it seems to be that we are showing cooperation where there should be a lot of tension. That's very important.
That's so interesting what you say there. Yeah, when you look at it with from a different perspective, it is very much like that, isn't it? But then what about the disputed Chinese islands, for example, where there's a lot of tension from different parties on that? Why do you think they're disputed? I mean, I know that there's great minerals around such islands, but also, are they holding other secrets?
Well, look at I'll answer it, but also look at the Arctic regions. There are tremendous resources down below, and there's a lot of disputes between different nations, and everybody is eager to get into the Arctic game, including China. But at the same time, while you see a buildup of Russian forces, military forces in the area, you see scientific operations. For example, Finland and Russia do joint research. I'm sure Norwegians and the Russians, despite disliking each other, when it comes to the Arctic, they work together. Now, about China. Yeah, it's very interesting, but in our book we have a whole chapter and more about the Pacific regions and the observations by the Soviet and Russian navies of very unusual objects and cases. So, while China is claiming the islands and others don't like it, at the same time, if they're building their, more military presence there, could it be that it's not the Americans they're afraid of or want to put their force against? See, in the book we present facts, cases throughout the world, but we don't present conclusions per se. We have some of our opinions. We'll let the readers decide, because this information is tremendous, and hopefully those who create policies also read it, because there is so much that the Soviet Navy had observed, and Russian Navy before the Soviet period and some after. For example, the Antarctic. Not much is known about what's going on in the Antarctic region, but we present a whole information about South Georgia Island, which is a British territory, and very few people know what's going on in terms of UFO and USO observations there. But the Soviet Navy was interested. Why? It's too far away from the Soviet waters. You know what? At the same time, I see great interest to the Antarctic from India, China, Australia.
Yes.
So something is going on down below.
Yes, and do you think this UFO and USO secret is worldwide? For example, it's not just it's not just privately held with the government. It's these governments are working together with this secret worldwide. And do you think it's a secret of they have an understanding of what they're even dealing with, for example?
I think they do. In our books, we present interesting information that came out a while ago. For example, in 1990, when Russia was falling apart, the Soviet Union was disintegrating, and more information was able to come out. There was a Russian general, Air Force General Tretyak, who said that we don't attack UFOs because we know the power with which they would respond. And we don't want to deal with it because we know what's going to happen to us. And, this is what we have in our books. We have in our, especially the latest, we show actual cases where UFOs were challenged and what happened, or their own unprovoked actions. So I don't think any of the navies want to lose any more aircraft or ships. They understand the danger, and I am sure on some specific level, our governments are in touch with each other. I would definitely say that China, Russia, the United States, of course the United Kingdom and France, and probably Germany, because of its proximity to the Baltic Sea, are in touch with each other and share information.
Right. Okay. But as to what is your truth as to the nature of this reality that's interacting with us over Russia as well? How have you summarized it over all these years to your truth?
It's alien. I don't know if it's extraterrestrial. It may be another, a more ancient civilization that exists in the bodies of ocean of our planet, and there may be that our oceans are connected through underwater tunnels. It's not just me saying that. It's a number of Soviet naval officers who studied this phenomenon. I have their works too. That they believe it too. For example, Evgeny Litvinov and others. I don't want to say extraterrestrial, but at the same time, we've done research with ancient Indian writings, and we're not talking about Vimanas and so forth. We're talking about underwater battles that go back to thousands of years ago, and tremendous description of the vehicles down below, and we find connections to the modern cases. And that's especially true for our chapter number 2, the so-called swimmers of 1982 in the Lake Baikal and other parts of the Soviet Union. A lot of information came out in 1982, but not to researchers like myself, however, to within the Soviet armed forces, about a very unusual incident that took place in the Lake Baikal when Soviets tried to capture unusual humanoid beings and failed. And then we found out that, there were bulletins in the Soviet armed forces about similar USO and UFO objects coming in and out of the bodies of water. One of them had to do with Lake Sarez. And again, here we have an ecological situation where these beings, whoever they are very much interested in our ecological impact. Doesn't have to even to be human created. That was another case. And what is it that they want to do? Do they want, whoever they are, to challenge us, or do they want to maintain ecological health of the planet? And I see that the second is more correct, that their actions are actually helping preserve ecology, or they try to maybe encapsulate the damage we're doing to it. And even the case in Chernobyl in 1986, there were reports of an object that mitigated the effects of the explosion. So, in my opinion, whoever that entity or various entities are, they are interfering to the extent that they exert control. They let the governments of our planet know that we definitely are not alone, and the armed forces don't bother them. But what's interesting is if we have reports of different entities challenging each other, and we have, for example, you are now in Holland, okay? We have a report going back to 1716 by a Dutch ambassador / spy in the court of, Emperor Peter the Great, and, the observations over St. Petersburg of the two objects colliding with each other and a third one observing. Now, this report is in the Russian state archives and confirmed by Naum Sinyavin, who was one of the top Russian naval personalities of the time, who observed it from another angle. That territory is very interesting to anybody who studies Russian UFO / USO history, because so much is happening in the area of the Baltic Sea, of the Gulf of Finland, and especially around Norway and Scandinavia and the Kola Peninsula. And we list all this information as much as possible. We also list other cases of sinister activities, let's put it that way, or something we cannot understand what's going on, including, cases where they take away new missiles or, actively visit Russian submarine bases around, Soviet borders, Russian borders.
It's incredible, isn't it? And if they wanted to take us out or take those submarines out, of course they could have done. What was interesting as well, everything's interesting that you've said, but also, when we look at the amount of, the oceans, the depths of some of our oceans on this planet, we really have not explored them as much as we could have done, have we? When we look at, going into space, which I find, which I think is fantastic, but really we haven't exactly explored our planet as much as we could have done, have we?
Not at all. I think we know more about the moon than we know about our oceans. And from the research that we've done with Philip, I would say that some of the most tremendously interesting areas are definitely the Pacific Ocean, the so-called Devil's Triangle, not far away from Japan, and China. Of course, the Antarctic, like I mentioned, but also the Indian Ocean. That's not where there are too many cases, but there are some very interesting cases. And what's interesting is that we write a lot about late Pavel Popovich, who also was from Ukraine, which is, prior to anybody who was born in that part of the Soviet Union. But also outside of that, he was a very interesting personality, a Soviet cosmonaut who was in the first team of the cosmonauts, that famous team. He, throughout his life, he helped protect UFO researchers in the Soviet Union, advance their interests, not afraid to speak up in the dark times, let's say, of the Soviet rule about UFO research and the need to be more open. Now, even after the fall of the Soviet Union, he referred to the oath that he gave and that he cannot reveal all of the information when he spoke to Ukrainian journalists. But he did mention that he knew a lot. He knew about so-called underwater bases, and he mentioned the one in the Indian Ocean. And based on our research of the Indian sources and other information, I would say that we need to pay more attention to what's going on out there. There were quite interesting cases, by the way, not too far from the areas of Iran, years ago, and related territories. Now, I would definitely also say Mariana Trench, one of the deepest, if not the deepest area in the ocean, should be studied more. And we mention why in our books, using Soviet information. There are a few other places I believe are of great interest, especially the Pacific side of the South America, that we have a very interesting case reported by Soviet scientists who tried to study some, to take samples underwater, and they put down lowered their equipment on steel cables, and then when they brought up the cables, they were sheared off, like somebody cut them off with gigantic scissors, I guess. And we confirmed the existence of that expedition through other sources which we list. This is very interesting. I think something similar happened in the Mariana Trench, and I'm sure there's great interest from Japan, from Russia, and other nations, in that part of the world. Again, because there are so many resources, natural resources down below, And speaking about the resources, I want to go back to the Russian Arctic territories and the Krasnoyarsk region and Yakutia. We have cases there, Kevin. We have cases report that are kept in the files of the meteorological, for example, official meteorological stations, going back to 1979, cases that were confirmed separately by that secret program that I told you about, the so-called SETCA program. This was very interesting. Something happened in 1979 over the Arctic territories. There was a wave of UFO and USO observations. 1965 is another year, and those who do research, for example, in the West and the Orient about their own UFO cases, they will be able to compare and correlate what's going on. Why was 1965 such an important year for UFO observations in the Mediterranean and so forth? Now, we see it through the eyes of the Soviet Navy personnel, but they were very accurate. They had to be in what they report. And then you see reports of, unusual, huge objects, some of them, 300 meters in diameter, some of them very large cylindrical entities that would separate into smaller pieces and fly to different, this is interesting, triangles, different shapes, going through with incredible velocities. Down below, we've never had technology that could compare to what the Russians had seen down below. And, they were scared. They thought this was the Americans, but at the same time, they knew the extent of the American technology. They had a very active espionage program. They were not stupid.
No, not at all. And okay, just to go back to what you were saying about the beings that were spotted at the bottom of the oceans, in a sense.
Sure.
These were, I believe, if I got this right, they were giant beings, and there were also very tiny beings as well. There were two different types. Is that right?
I don't know much about the tiny beings, except for the case we mentioned in another book, the Monchegorsk 1987 case, which again, in the Kola Peninsula, and again, tied to that SETCA program. Let's speak about the 9-foot tall humanoid-looking beings.
Oh, just before we do as well, what suit?
Have...
Were they wearing a spacesuit as well? Were they wearing a spacesuit?
They were wearing silvery outfits. They were not wearing anything visible as a breathing apparatus. These beings were doing something, down in the Lake Baikal, one of the most interesting bodies of water. And we have a lot about Baikal in the book. And the Soviet frogmen tried to capture them, and they failed, of course. And we'll show why. What's important is we have confirmation of the same incident by Mikhail Demidenko, who was a well-known Russian writer who spoke Chinese and was a Soviet military translator, and somebody who was not afraid to look for answers. So we have confirmation from him, and we also have the same year another case from the SETCA, from that military academic UFO research program, of a similar, identical being who was sighted at a completely different part of the Soviet Union. Okay, we have also cases from the modern Russian military. I don't want to even say military, counterintelligence agency who spotted a similar being in the Far East, and then we list other similar beings that were sighted throughout the years in the Soviet Union. So that's very interesting. Again, these are confirmed cases, and I'm sure there was more research. So somebody is actively operating in the bodies, in the lakes of our planet, deep water lakes. The Soviets were alarmed, and your readers will be able to see in the book, what happened. They sent a special representative to for example, another deep water lake, Issyk-Kul in Central Asia, a tremendously interesting area for UFO and USO research. And because of that, we were able to find out about the existence of the engineering forces in their bulletin about UFOs and USOs. But there were other sources of information. In our other books, we also touch upon the Soviet space program and the cosmonaut observations and so forth. And sometimes things get interconnected because we know that Soviet cosmonauts had observed very unusual things down below in the oceans, like gigantic waves coming from nowhere and crashing into each other. And we have observations from a number of Soviet submarine commanders, for example, about the Bermuda Triangle areas or unusual things they sighted along the American shores whenever they could come close.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Everything is interconnected.
I think it is. Do you know that? I think, yeah, you're right. And it's interesting in your books as well when you talk about the Bermuda Triangle, because that's always had an air of mystery about it. But there is something about that area. There is. I mean, it's very well documented.
Many years ago, I was in the Yucatan Peninsula, and I had a chance to speak to the local people, including some of, who knew a lot, let's say. And they told me about the underwater ancient road built probably thousands of years ago that is not too far away from Yucatan. And they, about a few other things about the Mayan ruins that not many people know about, and they want to keep it that way so it doesn't get stolen. But it was years ago. There were other interesting, in Argentina, as an example, in the 1960s, early 1960s, there was a case of the Argentinian Navy trying to capture, giant submarines that couldn't exist anywhere else in the world, and how they tried to bomb them. And Nikita Khrushchev was very much interested in the whole case, as the United States were interested. And he sent, I think, special inquiries to the top diplomats. So, again, but if we go to the other part of the world, for example, Japan. Well, we know about ancient Japanese observations, but we present Russian observations that go back to beginning of the 20th century, and the unusual sightings, the so-called wheels, gigantic wheels under the ocean, luminescent, radiant wheels that appear from nowhere around Russian ships. And more, and there is more than that, including this integration of Soviet military jets that try to approach a certain area. We try to get as much, but also, Kevin, we do not miss other parts of Russia, former Soviet Union, Chukotka, Kamchatka. We have cases that are incomparable with anything else seen in the world. But they're not reported by let's say, somebody who is not trained. We're talking about scientists and military people, and sometimes government officials.
Yeah, that's right. It's fantastic. Your work is really fantastic, and we're just touching on a few cases here because the book is packed with cases. And just out of curiosity, how long did it take to put this book together?
Well, I've been putting information a few years, but and I'm sure we keep following up on what's going on, and if in the future we need to expand it, we will. But I've been following, like I said, for many years this information. But I'm not a lone wolf. Philip has received a lot of interesting, reports from those who studied in the Soviet Union. I have been doing it for many years, and some of the people are not here anymore. But still, I honor them because they were they're the brave ones who collected information when it wasn't fashionable to do so in the Soviet Union. You could get punished. And especially today, we have, young, relatively young researchers who still continue doing that. People are not as interested today in the subject as they were when the Soviet Union disintegrated, because it was a virgin territory. There were no tabloids. People wanted to know about UFOs because they talked to each other. They knew that something is not right, something is going on in the sky. Okay, so let's say 90% is related to military tests. And that's why the government did not really want people to speak about UFOs, so American intelligence agents or NATO would not find out. But 10% cannot be explained. And if we use one of the top Soviet scientists, academician Mintz, he said that they felt like they were under a microscope. He was involved with the space research program. And that's how it felt. And Moscow, they just couldn't control. They knew they couldn't control what was going on.
No.
And they came to the conclusion that let's leave it alone because we can't do anything to them, but they don't seem to harm us. And, so all this information from many sources is put together. I've received letters, I remember, back in 1980s, early 1990s, from other people, not just the Russians, but those who knew, what was going on about Georgia, for example, and also gigantic beings and a cave with the skeletons that was discovered in Georgia back in the 19th century. Very identical beings to what was the Soviets tried to capture. I'm always amazed at the sincerity and details that the Soviet naval officers would put in their reports. When the Glasnost was in full force, and how they described and tried to classify objects they had seen. And again, they knew these were no Americans or Soviet military tests. It was something completely else.
Yes, absolutely. And, I've spoken about this on the show a few times, where it's quite well known that America has a secret space program. There's a secret shuttle that comes down to land now and then to get refueled and take back on its new tasks. Do you think Russia has a secret space program as well?
Well, I would be surprised if they didn't have a secret, especially today when they're trying to build up and expand their military forces. It's all shrouded in secrecy, and they have special forces that guard their Russian space program. Still, they have they have failures like a lot of others, which is very interesting to me, especially the Phobos mission that failed a few years ago. And we talk a lot about Phobos in other books. It's interesting, but yes, Russia has. I'm sure they have a secret military space program, just as they do have an expanded creation of the new type of submarines. They don't need as many submarines as we had back in the smaller size, more powerful submarines built on completely different technology. And it's not a secret. It's in the media, whatever we can get, they do publish some of this information.
A friend of mine works in the Merchant Navy. He works on he's transporting, it's a chemical tanker, a huge chemical tanker. And, he has told me before about, sightings that they see underwater sometimes, lights underwater that they just can't explain. And he doesn't really want to talk about it, but he'll mention it to me because he knows of my interest. But yeah, there are lights out there. Do you get reports from people in the Merchant Navy potentially as well? Or people working on ships, on containers, or maybe that have come up with the same reports?
Yes, and in the book we have a lot of those container ships, freighters, other ships. It's there because they had to report it as well, and some of them were not afraid to get it published in the media. Again, a different time, but some of them are very persistent, and a lot of them are come from the merchant marines. But let me tell you something else. We also are daily looking at the forums of for example, where Russian sailors exchange information, and some of them, do talk about sightings that they would not want to reveal during the Soviet times, or even now, because sometimes they're being laughed at. Although what is there to laugh at, But it's very interesting because it continues, and they do see, unusual things today as well as before. But in the Soviet time, it was so interesting because, again, this was a different civilization. And, they had their own program, and this was not a pleasant program and it required, tremendous secrecy and build-up of military forces. Sometimes they built up too much and they couldn't sustain it anymore. But because of that, they also wanted to know any potential enemy out there. And no matter what they thought about UFOs and USOs, they had to study them with the purpose, too, of capturing and using technology. And this was one of the goals of the Setka program. Now, because of that, we collected a lot. And also on my website, I present cases of the Kazakhstan research as an example. One of the few areas we know about where the Setka scientists went on to study UFOs and, some USOs too, because of the Caspian Sea and so forth. So, yeah, it's very, very interesting. But it wasn't, the Setka was not the only source. Like I said, there are other sources. People speak to each other. We had a Ukrainian researcher, late Ukrainian researcher, Valentin Krapeva, who was very active and had a lot of friends in different areas. And one of them, a professor, showed him a photograph given to him by Soviet military officer, naval officer, who had himself observed a UFO that would ascend up through the waters behind, I think, a Navy cruiser, and they were able to take that photograph.
Incredible.
But, the Black Sea. But in the book, we have more cases from the Black Sea. This is one of the hottest areas in the Soviet Union for such observations. Very interesting cases.
Yeah, I can imagine the Black Sea being actually, there's a lot of activity on the Black Sea, a lot of military activity.
And scientific.
Yeah.
This is why, people, absolutely, this is why Bullard went, the American scientist, he went to study. Historically, there is so much down below, and maybe even pre-deluge, pre-flood, remnants of the civilization that are just being discovered today. And
well, that's interesting.
Again, there is so much interest.
That's interesting what you said there, because you think of before the great catastrophic event that happened on planet Earth to shift it. I mean, what happened to the dinosaurs really? We don't know. Was it a meteorite? Did gravity change? What killed off everything overnight? And what civilization was there prior to that? Did Atlantis exist? Were we so much more advanced in the past than we are right now in the present moment? And is that history below the ocean's floor? And I know we're talking about depths that are great depths to get to, and we can just about probably get to them, maybe. But yeah, it's incredible, isn't it, when you think about the potential on the seabed?
And yes, there was a person who passed away about 13 years ago. He was a Russian writer and scientist, and he lived in London. I think the last 5 years of his life, Alexander Garbovsky. And we mentioned, he was able to publish some of the most interesting books about, let's say, what we call ancient aliens today in the Soviet Union. I remember in 1966, and then there was another edition in 1970. Tremendous books. Well before anybody was publishing here, he and a few other people. He mentions a case in his books about an observation from the ancient Mediterranean of an object that had no oars, no sails. It was a fast-moving craft that the people in the ancient time observed. And I think it surfaced and then disappeared after a while. And in my research, and people will see it on my website, I get other confirmations of other ancient observations that Russian scientists brought forth. And I mentioned one of the Russian architects and professors who had a very difficult life. He went through the concentration camps and so forth. Nevertheless, in his younger years, he was able to be in the Vatican, and he claims that he had seen manuscripts that described ancient aliens and civilizations in contact with them. This was very interesting. But we also had, such as Mr. Agrest, who passed away in the United States some time ago. He was a Soviet scientist who published information about ancient contacts with, aliens or ancient astronauts many years ago in the Soviet Union. And he mentioned some very interesting information that wasn't available in the West before. So, yes. And again, in the book, we present a lot of the information from ancient India, Mahabharata, but even more than that.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And just out of curiosity, if you wanted to hold a UFO conference in Russia nowadays, do you still need to seek permission from the authorities to do such a thing?
Let me clarify. Right now, there are, once a year, they have the so-called Ziegel readings. It's a sort of a conference. And I know that Vadim Chernobrov speaks there. He is the head of the Kosmopoisk organization, a few other people. I think they would ask the government and local authorities for permission. It's different today than it was before. But certainly they would be under control, and there would be somebody to observe. But at the same time, think about the United States. We don't know who attends such conferences sometimes too. It's not as it was in the Soviet times. It's a different society today, and they have different goals maybe. I don't want to go too much into that because I do have people in Russia who help my research.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you for that. It was just, I just wondered what how accessible that was for Russians. And okay, well, just very, very, very quickly then, what impact, did UFOs have on Russia in a sense, in the bigger picture?
In the bigger picture, the presence of the UFOs and USOs caused Russian government, Soviet government to spend money on the creation of special programs, separately in the Navy, but then joint armed and academic programs to study that phenomenon. If we believe some of the most extreme claims, they obtain some technology that helps them. And, in our books we list such sources. If we don't go to the extremes, from their observations, they were able to determine that UFOs and USOs exist, but present no immediate danger.
Right. Okay. And we're at the end of the interview now, and I've so appreciated you being on, and it's been bloody interesting as well. What would you say is the most important message of your work to the audience?
We must continue. We must keep our eyes open, because we know that our governments will not reveal all the information that they have. We must keep our eyes open because it's very interesting, and sometimes we shouldn't jump to the immediate conclusions if we see naval exercises of different, Navy powers together. They may be doing it to show something else to somebody else, and always be curious about our planet, because we know relatively little. After all the centuries of scientific research, we still don't know that much about our oceans and our atmosphere.
Absolutely. And Paul, I hate to do this, right? I've got one more question that I've just been thinking, and I was going to ask you this. Sorry to do this, but when you consider countries like North Korea or Iran, well, more really North Korea, that's very isolated. It's creating these nuclear weapons. It's very fear-based. Do you think that would it be interesting to see or to find out what sightings are based over a country like North Korea's military and nuclear activity at a time when it's going through what Russia went through many decades ago, in a sense? Not as harsh, obviously, but with it developing nuclear weapons. If they care about our ecology, they should be caring about what's taking place in North Korea.
I think so. Unfortunately, we don't have any independent, UFO group in Korea, but I would definitely keep an eye on the South Korea, and hopefully they have researchers. I do know that Seoul Times published announcement about the book, so that's good, about this USO book. But I think also our governments of the United States, Russia, and China keep a keen eye on the situation there, because maybe they don't want things to go off balance.
Yeah, I would say so. But it just, what it was for me asking the question was, I think they do care. I think this UFO phenomena does care, and I think they care very much that they would not want any nuclear detonation taking place, because I think there's ramifications for it, in interdimensional ramifications that we don't even have a clue about in our science right now. Well,
Absolutely.
Paul, it's been a bloody interesting interview with yourself. You're a fascinating guy. Your website is
www.PaulStonehill-Russian-UFO-and-USO-research.com.
Excellent. Okay. Well, that website has been coming up on the screen throughout the interview, and there's much more information on the website as well, with all your years' worth of work on there. I would love to get you on. Are you planning to do another book?
We will let you know. We have some ideas with Philip. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm sure it won't stop here. I'm sure it won't do. But there's so many. All your books are available from Amazon and all good bookstores. We'll link the other books at the bottom of this video as well. And I'd just like to say, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for asking me to be on the show. Have a great Sunday.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.com, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.